Hello and welcome to this session on emotional intelligence in a virtual world. I'll just get my screens sorted here. I'm Billy Byrne, so welcome to the session. I'm an EMCC accredited coach and I'm based in Dublin in Ireland. So just give you a little bit of background about myself before we go. So I work with this fabulous team of people at Kinch Lyons who are based here in Dún Laoghaire, as I say, just south of Dublin. So we have Alan, Niamh, Tanya and Julie. And Kinch Lyons are a firm of organizational psychologists. And as you can see from our logo there, we transform how people experience work for the better. So that's what we try to do day in, day out. And I'm very, very lucky to be working with such a great team of people. So some of our clients, just briefly, who we tend to work with and had the honor of working with right through the last year as well. So these are just some of the people that we work with on an ongoing basis. So just in getting prepared for today's session, so I'd just like to maybe prompt you to think about some of the things that you can control. This is a pre-record session, so you've got some control over what you can do here. So I just invite you to think about a few things. So firstly, is this the best time for you to do this? Just even stop and think, you know, am I trying to squeeze in this session now? Am I at my best? Should I be maybe doing this at a later time? So is it the best time? Worth thinking about. You've got control. You can always decide to stop at this stage and come back later if you wish. Secondly, am I physically in the right place? So am I set up best and to be at my best for the session? So things like, you know, have I got, you know, are there distractions here? Am I comfortable? Should I move places somewhere else so that I can really sort of engage in the session as we go along? Thirdly, am I emotionally in the right place to do this? So what's my mood like today? So, you know, for example, if you are, you know, quite energized and positive, well, that puts you in a really good place to be curious and really looking for possibilities from what we're talking about. Or maybe you're a bit more subdued, but that may help you to stay more focused and maybe more analytical and critical of the things I'm saying. So just thinking again, emotionally, are you in the right place for the session? And finally, and this is a little bit of forward thinking here, forecasting, how do you plan to stay focused during the next hour? You know, you're going to be looking at this for more or less an hour or so. So how can you remain focused and be at your best? So that's what thinking about in advance as well. If you have, maybe think about taking some breaks or some plans as we go. So congratulations, you've actually done some emotionally intelligent thinking. Just going through that exercise there has exercised some of that emotional intelligence skill, which is about how we think about emotions more than how we actually experience them, because you were thinking in advance of what you're about to do and how you're going to be at your best. And that's a theme we're going to come to quite a lot during the session today. And it really is at the core of what I want to, I suppose, engage with you today. So how can I help you? I mean, I can do some things here as well. You've had some things in your control, but I've given some thought to how can I help you to be at your best and help you during the day, during the session. So what I decided to do was, like, let's break this up into 4 chapters, like 4 chapters of a book. So that, like, you know, there'll be 4 discrete sections, not all of equal length by any means, but it does mean that you can maybe also think about, oh, I've come to the end of a chapter, I can pause here, for example, or, you know, if I need to come back to the session and have a look again, I know where I want to jump in. So rather than have just an all the way through, I've decided to break it into 4 chapters. Again, the idea here is I'm thinking, using a bit of empathy here, thinking about putting myself in your shoes. How can I help you to get the most from the session? So here are the 4 chapters. The first, we look at the virtual workplace. Just say, what is that? What are some of the challenges there? We then look about how we lead and manage virtual teams and what, again, are the challenges there and also the opportunities. Thirdly, I want to look at the role of emotions. The role that they play in a virtual world. Obviously, they play an enormous role in our physical world, the physical environment. But when we're in a virtual setting, what are the differences and what role do they play? As chapter 4 is really, I suppose, is really the center, and what I wanted to get to is like changing how we think about emotions and the implications for coaching. And I'll finish up with just a few conclusions as well when we get there. So here we are. Let's start with chapter 1, the virtual workplace. This is a phrase I came across recently, and it really struck home with me about what it's like to be working in a virtual world. It's out of sight, but still in mind. So the people that we may be working with, particularly in the last year during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people were out of sight, but very much still in our mind. And how we keep these people in our minds and how we think about them is really important to us as coaches, as leaders, as mentors in whatever role we have, or even working with our colleagues, but keeping people in mind at all times. So let's have a little think about the virtual world. What is a virtual team? This is a working definition. I just want to draw out one or two small items here. So it's a group of individuals who work across time, geographical, and organizational boundaries, of a mix of these, obviously. But the team is enabled by communication technology. So, we're heavily reliant, if we're in a virtual team, on some technologies, whether it's phone, email, but some communication technology in order for us to work together, communicate, and work as a team. Typically, we definitely going to be talking about geographical boundaries where, the team is divided out, virtually, let's say. But also there may be time constraints if you have a global team that could also feature there. And indeed, there could also be, typically organizational boundaries. But the key feature here is that for the virtual team to work, it needs communication technology. So I'd like to look first then at, just the example of a few examples of virtual teams. So these are just a few examples. There's not a comprehensive list by any means. It's just some examples to get you thinking about virtual teams so that we're all on the same page. So the first one is where all team members are distributed in space and or time, could be. So everybody, we're all individually distributed. So it could be a sales team. It's got nothing to do with the current, pandemic or anything like that. But there's a sales team that's perhaps on the road, so always out there and relying on technology to keep in touch. It could also be a global team where we have people distributed around different parts of the world, but still part of a single team. Or, this is where a lot of us found ourselves during the COVID-19 crisis as working from home. So effectively, we're all distributed in space predominantly during that time. So that's one type of virtual team, but it's not the only one. I want to look at another example as well. So where we have, let's say, team members are distributed, but into smaller sub-teams. So it's not just everyone is on their own, which is a complete scatter. But let's say that we have teams where we have individual sub-teams, if you like, and these are potentially across geographic and time zones as well. So it could be a global IT team. So for example, we may have part of the team maybe in Asia, part of the team maybe in Europe, part of the team maybe in the US, and overall having a global workday and providing, say, 24/7 support. So we have these regional teams. Now, interestingly, the leader may or may not be physically located with one of the teams. So the leader may not be with any of the teams, or could actually be sitting with one of the teams. And that's important consideration for the leader as well in terms of how they lead. We'll come back to that later. The third one is where the team actually has a physical location. The team is located, there is maybe an office area or pod for the particular team. But some of the team members work remotely on a regular basis, regular being like at least a day a week for some of the time. So this is what we'll call maybe hybrid working. And this we would have had prior to COVID. And I think we look later, we'll see that it's probably going to be a feature into the future where there is some form of hybrid working. So that's the virtual team. So let's just take each of these three examples and just take, okay, what does it mean from the leader's perspective? So in the first one, the leader is located remotely from everybody. So effectively, you know, like the diagram on your screen there, like the leader is connected to everybody, and they're not politically connected to each other apart from through technology. And they may or may not be across time zones, depending. So it could be just within a country or between countries. The second one is where the leader is actually co-located with a local team. So the leader actually is there physically located with some people, some local team, but has other teams who are located in other geographies and time zones. And that has specific challenges as well. Particularly, I think there can be some in-group, out-group dynamic going on where perhaps the team where the leader is located may seem to have or be perceived to have more influence and be closer to the center of gravity of the organization. So that needs to be minded. And then the third one is where the leader is located with the team, but some of the team are away at different times. So maybe someone who works from home, maybe, or works remotely a day or two a week. But again, the leader is co-located. So sometimes the leader can be located with the team and sometimes not. Still a virtual team though. Even if only one member of a team is working in a hybrid, you've got to start doing some thinking of the team as a virtual team. So I think that will serve us well if we think of that. It isn't just a completely distributed workplace. So some of the potential benefits of virtual teams in the broadest sense. So obviously there's personal flexibility. So for the individual, if they've had other commitments outside of the workplace, which most people have, obviously, they've got some flexibility on that if they can work from home, maybe for periods of time, or indeed avoid commuting altogether or reduce the amount of commuting time. So, you know, that personal flexibility as to where they live and their days, that's a potential benefit of the virtual team. For the organization, there is the opportunity to have access to the best talent available and also be able to attract and retain talent. And this, I was working with an organization recently where this really came to the fore during COVID, where they were able to actually hire someone in quite a remote location, but was really the exact person that they were looking for. And for some reason, they hadn't even thought about this beforehand. They kind of thought about getting someone to move to their location and work there. Now they've managed to hire this person who is working on the other side of the country and exactly the person they want. So I think that's a great lesson. Thirdly, there's an opportunity for increased diversity. Because we have access to a broader grouping, there is a real opportunity here for organizations to increase diversity in the broadest sense. And even again, I was working with someone recently who, because of mobility issues, literally, you know, could not, you know, travel through public transport or otherwise to get to work locations, but was, you know, absolutely huge talent in terms of their abilities. But because of being able to work from home, they were able to work and work with an organization and bring that, you know, that diversity, both of thinking and experience, but also at a broader level of diversity to the organization. There is an opportunity also for enhanced creativity. Unfortunately, we often think of creativity merely in terms of, you know, getting people together on the whiteboard and the brainstorming. What about individual creativity? What about the great ideas that a person has, just that they need some space to themselves? And it may be literally sitting on the beach, looking out to sea and thinking. So there is an opportunity as well for virtual teams to leverage both individual and group creativity. And finally, I suppose there is the global workday. If you can have a team distributed across the globe, well, then you can do a full 24/7 support. So those are all things that we could see as potential benefits. So what of the future? Where are we going? So the future is virtual. I think it has been accelerated. We're heading that direction anyway. It doesn't mean we'll all be working virtually, but there will be much more emphasis on virtual teams. So I just, the CIPD did some research during the pandemic, and a paper called Embedding New Ways of Working, Implications for the Post-Pandemic Workplace. And this is a quote which certainly resonates with, even anecdotally, with a lot of people I've worked with in organizations. The pandemic has probably changed for good the distribution of work between the regular workplace and home for many workers. So I think what they're really saying is that there's going to be a shift, much more people working from home in the future. And they looked at the research as well in terms of what was actually going on during the pandemic. So this is in the middle of 2020, UK. So they share the workforce working from home continuously. If you look at the red bars, you can see in the finance that 80% of the workforce, this is from the organizations that they had sampled, were working from home continuously during the pandemic. Now, you know, in some areas like production and distribution was a much lower percentage, but overall very high percentages between the IT and business services and finance, public admin, huge numbers of people. Now, this is during the pandemic, but say, okay, that was then. What about what's the future going to be like? Or part of the same survey, and this is employers now, this is not employees asking them what their aspirations are. This is what the expectations from employers, again, from the same paper. So before the crisis, you know, how many people were working, you know, at least one day a week, remote home working, and then people who worked all the time. You know, you can look at the figures and say, you know, you can argue about like, you know, oh, I thought it'd be higher or lower. But if the big message I think coming across is there's going to be a very large increase, both in the people who regularly work from home, in other words, work from home at least one day a week. And indeed, the number of people who work from home all the time. So there is, that increase is going to be there. We're going to have a much more distributed workforce, which leads us to a key question, I think. Are we prepared for a more distributed workplace? It has been accelerated against our wishes, maybe, certainly accelerated at a pace that we weren't expecting. So a couple of questions here, like, or a couple of things to point out. So what works in a face-to-face may not work as well in a virtual setting. I'm not saying it won't work as well, but it may not. Just taking something that works in a face-to-face and then trying to reproduce it virtually. Some things do, but not everything does. And indeed, the danger of trying to simply adapt a face-to-face, you know, the water cooler moments and things like this into a virtual setting, and even the way we manage meetings, we may miss opportunities to really leverage the virtual setting. And I'm going to pick up a few things here, I think, where we lead, and particularly people in leadership roles, can really leverage virtual settings if they choose to do so. Secondly, I say that leading and managing remotely, it does require us to develop not just new skills, we will definitely need skills, but also a new way of thinking about work, and a new way of thinking about leading, and a new way of thinking about emotional intelligence. So it's not just a replica of the physical workplace, as I said, and that needs us to change mindset. And finally, and this, because this whole session is about emotional intelligence, we know it's important in normal leadership performance in terms of, you know, being a top leader. But I would argue it's even more important than ever. But we do need a shift in emphasis. But it is more important than ever. And I'll come to the reasons, and I'll make some arguments around that. So one takeaway, though, I think I'd like, and hopefully as we go through the session, you'll see this, that there are some unique opportunities once we recognize them in the virtual workplace and the workplace of the future. And that's something I think we need to be attuned to. So we've come to the end of chapter 1. Just if you need to take a pause or a break or stand up or a drink of water or something, we're going to move on to chapter 2. So here we are, leading and managing virtual teams. So we've looked at the virtual workplace. So what's it like to lead and manage in a virtual team? So I will firstly take this quote that I think everybody knows from John Donne: "No man is an island." In 2021, we were all islands, and we are all islands in some case. where we all, certainly during lockdowns, we all felt quite isolated. We have technology, but certainly we all felt more an island than we ever had been, and had to come to terms with very, very quickly. So maybe ask you to reflect a little bit. If you want to pause as well while you do this, please do. So in your own experience, that's maybe being a leader, or maybe with clients that you work with. What do you believe are the most challenging aspects of leading and managing virtual teams? You know, what comes to mind? What are the parts of trying to lead a virtual team that you believe to be the biggest challenges? Maybe just think about that. A good place to start, I think, is if you're thinking of a leader, we should always start with the people that we're trying to lead. Think about other people. So let's start from the individual's perspective rather than the leader's perspective. I think it's a good place for us to as an entry point. So some of the challenges for the individual, and this is, if you read anything about challenges, there are many of them, but these are four that regularly come up in a lot of both the research, and I'm sure you would maybe have experienced even these yourselves. So the first is that social and professional isolation. So you ask people what they miss about work, you know, say, God, I miss the people. It's not the same, not being in the virtual world. You know, I'm not meeting my colleagues when they come in the morning, you know, seeing them at their desk, you know, going for that cup of coffee, going for maybe lunch with them. So that, you know, that personal relationship, that social aspect is missing, but also the professional isolation. That, you know, you don't feel part of your group anymore professionally. You know, maybe you're part of a finance team. It's quite a lot more lonely place to be. Secondly, there's the loss of identification with the organization. We kind of take it for granted a bit, but you know, every time we walk in the door of that office, you know, there's a physical statement. You know, we are arriving here. You know, you've got maybe your lanyard around your neck and your pass to get into the office. You know, your name, so the logos, all of the reminders of the organization you belong to. And these are really important physical reminders. These come up in things like organizational culture as well. And we can tend to lose a bit of the identification of our identity and how we identify with the organization if we're not in and out of the organization on a regular basis. So that's worth thinking about. That's a challenge for us. There may be also feelings of being excluded. Now, we can always, certainly we might feel excluded. And whether we are being excluded, may or may not be, but we can certainly feel excluded. As I said earlier, particularly if we are in a remote team and there is another team who maybe where the leader sits, or maybe that this other team sits in head office, if we want to go at that, where they seem to be a bit closer to power. And you know, and we watch for evidence of, you know, they're getting a better deal than we are. So things like transparency are really important when we're looking at virtual teams. And then finally, that lack of physical and psychological separation between work and home. I mean, that's a big one, and you know, practically everybody has a challenge here, because when we are in the physical workplace, there are natural physical separation because we have to go to work, which involves a commute. So the downside of the commute is the time it takes, but it is a buffer zone, and a lot of people I've coached over the last 12 months, let's say, again and again, would say to me, you know, I never realized it, but like my cycle to work in the morning, on my train journey, it provided that bit of buffer zone at either side. So by the time I arrived in work, I was in work, and when I got home in the evening, I had switched off. Now I'm literally having my breakfast and I'm straight into work immediately afterwards. Or again, a regular story, worse again, is where I heard this many times, someone saying, you know, I get up and I actually, before I have my breakfast, I decide to just check my email. And 2 hours later, I realized I hadn't even had my breakfast yet because I just got stuck into something. And suddenly I've just landed in work unintentionally. I didn't even mean to be in work at that stage. And the workday then can extend, because there's no barrier, boundary at either side. So those are all challenges for the individual. But let's look at even some of the research which is done pre-COVID. So this is a global survey that I just wanted to pull out a few pointers here. So, this is a survey around, what are the differences between virtual and face-to-face teams? It's from a number of years ago, as to what was more challenging, what was less challenging. And the three top areas that were seen as more challenging were managing conflict, making decisions, and expressing opinions. Now, you can take it, the expressing opinions can feed in both to the decisions and the conflict piece. But they are all to do with that interpersonal piece. Like conflict is between people, decisions like individual or collaboration, group decision making, again, people involved, and expressing opinions to other people. So it's all that interpersonal dynamic that's causing the challenge. So I've taken, from this and also my own experience of been working with quite a lot of, both at an organizational level, at a team level, at the individual level, some of the challenges. I just to pull out three, okay, as examples almost to help us thread our way through the rest of the session. So three challenges from leadership challenges for virtual teams. The first is building relationships and maintaining relationships, and also building and maintaining trust. So how do you do that? Much easier to do that when you've got that physical proximity, and you can meet someone for a coffee and talk to them and get a sense of them and all of that goes on. That's the first one. The second one is making and influencing decisions. Influence came up again and again and again in coaching sessions that I've been coaching over the last year, in finding more difficult to influence both at group level and individual level, because the virtual world made it more difficult to do that. And also managing conflict, because new conflicts arose, and then due to the virtual environment, and then trying to manage them was also a bit more difficult. So with these in mind, what's the common thread here? Emotions. In all of these areas, emotions play a role, whether it's about trust, relationships, decision making also has a huge emotional content. And managing conflict, if you think about conflict, is an emotional reaction as well. So emotions are threaded through here as well. So I'm going to pose a question for you. What's so different about leading virtually? So why should it be so different? And I have a prepared answer that I have is what I wanted to highlight, what I see as an enormous difference about leading virtually. And it's probably not the one you're expecting. It's because we have much less information about what others are thinking, feeling, and doing. Just think about it. When we're in the virtual world, we don't have the ongoing access to, even seeing what people are doing. You can walk into an office and see what's going on. You also get a sense of how people are feeling, like what's the atmosphere here. And you also get a sense of overhearing what people are thinking. So you get a sense of things when you're in a physical environment. So leading virtually means that we have much less information about what others are thinking, feeling, and doing. And that is really important as a leader in terms of understanding and also guiding other people's thoughts, feelings, and actions. That's what we do as leaders. So we have less information coming in, and we're trying to influence more in a virtual setting. So what's the danger here? So in a virtual setting, our natural response is to fill in these gaps about what others are thinking, what others are feeling, what others how they feel about things, and what they're doing. We do this anyway, and it's good. In terms of we always fill in the gaps. I had an interesting experience myself yesterday where I was due to meet a new client. And all I had to go on were literally a couple of emails from the client. And already, in my mind, I was filling in the gaps. I'd already built almost a persona based on very little information. So we do this, and we fill in the gaps. It helps us to deal with the world anyway. But when we have, a lot of information, we are filling in very few gaps. So just think about it, like if you're seeing your team every day, you have a good sense of what they're thinking. You have a good sense of how they feel. There's very few surprises, really. And we know what they're doing. We can see what's going on. However, if we're only dipping in and out now because of the virtual world and others that we have to actually log in and go in and talk to someone on screen, for example, or if the team is distributed all the time, we have much less data, a lot of opportunities to fill in gaps. And how are we doing that? Are we doing it, excuse me, accurately? So that's the danger, I say, in the virtual world. We are filling in the gaps, but there's a lot of things that we're missing. So here's some of the things we're missing. The individual context, firstly. So we're getting vignettes, we're getting small excerpts from what's going on with the other person, rather than a blended overview. We have to recognize that we have fewer data points at an individual level. Okay. Secondly, at a group context, it is a lot more difficult to assess an overall group reaction to something, the group mood or the group tone. Even, by the way, if such a thing exists now, and this, you can discuss this as well philosophically, if you like, you know, if everyone is distributed, is there such a thing as a group reaction to something, compared to if everyone is together and they're, you know, bouncing off each other and feeding each other's energy. But it is, even, you know, in virtual settings, much more difficult to read the room, as we might call it, and assess a group reaction. And thirdly, and really importantly, we have reduced access to all of those emotional cues that we would normally have. As I say, you know yourself, even just walking into the office, you can pick up, you know, what is the mood here today, what's going on. And indeed, others pick up our mood as well if we are leaders. So we have come to the end of chapter 2. We should now be looking into our next chapter. Again, if you want to take a break at this stage or pause for a moment, are you ready to engage with the next section? Chapter 3, the role of emotions in a virtual world. So if you only take away one slide from today and only take away one thought, I would encourage you to take away this one. And it's from David Caruso and Peter Salovey from the book, The Emotionally Intelligent Manager. So, and this quote means so much to me, and I can see it in action all the time with my coaching clients, and again in my own engagement with the world on a daily basis. So emotions are data. In fact, emotions are in large part data about people. Now, not solely, but in large part. A lot of the emotions that we feel are to do with people. Just think about it yourself. What triggers your emotions? And maybe it's self-talk, negative or positive. What triggers conflict? We talked about influencing earlier, building trust. What is trust? It's emotional data as well. So think about emotions as data. Okay, that it will serve us well as we go through the rest. So if you take emotions as data, what's emotional intelligence? So emotional intelligence, and this is, I guess, kind of say in a nutshell, it's firstly how we experience emotions, which is often what we think about. People who are emotionally intelligent, you know, are good at picking up emotions, and they've got good self-awareness. That's typically what we think about. However, it's also how we think about emotions. There is a cognitive and an evaluative element to emotions. It's not just the experience of them. And the real key here is, how do we integrate the experience and the thought so that we deal with the world? You know, we arrive in the world every morning when we get up, and it's there to be dealt with. How do we integrate what we're experiencing and how we think about emotions to that last point? How do we manage our emotions to help us to deal with the world? So I just want to take a particular model because it makes it easier for us to have a framework to use as we go through. This is the Mesquite, the Myers, Salovey, Caruso model. And I'm not saying like one model is better than the other. You can look at the various trait-based model. This is an ability-based model. But the reason I'm going to this model is it'll become obvious as we go, because it gives us a better viewpoint when we're looking at emotional intelligence in a virtual setting. So just this particular model very briefly, 4 key elements to it, 4 abilities. The first is ability to recognize how we're feeling. So what am I feeling? What am I picking up? What do I think other people are feeling? How do I feel my emotions are impacting on other people? That's the perception. That is the first key ability. The second one is our ability to generate emotions in ourselves. You know, so for example, before I started the session here, like, I was trying to generate emotions to make sure that I was ready and set to have this, to do this session. And this is what I was hoping you were doing also at the start of the session, asking yourself those questions about how would you be at your best. So again, you know, and being able to shift your emotions to where they needed to be. Thirdly, and this is a real key one, we will come into that again and again, the ability to understand complex emotions, because emotions are rarely just one or the other. It's mixes and blends, but also how emotions transition. So how does an emotion go from one place to another, maybe in intensity or the opposite, moving away in reduced intensity. And also the ability to integrate emotions, and also in the moment being able to, almost like having a valve on our emotions when we're in the middle of something, how we regulate our emotions as we go. So that's just 4 key abilities. Don't have to worry about it. The point I'm coming to is about these emotions as data or emotions as information. So picking again our 3 areas, challenges: building relationships, managing influence decisions, managing conflict. So if we think about it, what's the information in the first bit? We connect with others by sharing emotional information. We are sharing with other people some emotions from ourselves, how we feel about things, and we're also picking up that from them. A lot of this is subconscious. We can do it consciously as well and do it with skill. But we build trust at an emotional level. It's not just a logical thing. There's logic in it and cognitive part, evaluation, but it's also that sense, that emotional level. In terms of influencing others, if you want to influence someone, like, you're going to use the emotional triggers as well as the logical ones. So we gather emotional information to feed into our decision making, and also we provide emotional information to others to help in their decision making. And of course, managing conflict. We reflect upon and manage our own emotions. When we are in conflict ourselves, we have to manage our emotions as to how we leverage the conflict and not let it get out of hand. And also we have to try and understand what are the motivations, the concerns, what's going on with the other person. If we're ever to manage conflict between ourselves and someone else, we really have to use empathy to think, where is this other person coming from? So if you think about how we typically gather emotions in a physical setting, just the verbal, the tone, just listening to someone, we pick up such a lot, the pitch of their voice, all of these things. Tone is so important. And we pick up so much there. Body language. Typically, we have a lot of access to body language because, the whole person is there in front of us. Even if they're seated, we still have access to see them. Their facial expressions, just, what's going on with their expressions. What do we see in their face, in their eyes, and what's going on there? We also have historical insights in that, we know from history, from this person, there may be cues, excuse me, and we all have cues that we leak out emotions, things we do when we are in certain emotional states. There's also the reading the room. As I was saying earlier, you walk into a room, just say it's a room, it's a meeting, 12 people, let's say, you get a sense of the room, and you don't do it, by the way. Think about it. You don't look at each individual face to see what is the room. It's more of a sense of what's going on. And some people are really skilled. They can go into a room, get a sense, and shift that mood in the room also. Much more difficult in a virtual setting. Physical setting, you can do that. There's also a background mood, like what has been going on around this. So again, just taking a meeting. So what was the general mood in the area, in the organization at the moment? This background piece that's going on. It's not just reading the room, it's an overall sense of what's happening. And then in a group setting, again, the reactions between participants, which again is missing in a virtual setting. You actually get to see like what's going on. You notice someone looks at someone else when you've said something, or someone seems to be signaling to someone, or just catching someone's attention over something. You can pick up a lot of information, emotional data, as we said, in a physical setting. However, in a virtual workplace, we suffer from, and I just use this term myself, emotional data deficit. So we have, less information available to us. So what's different? So we miss a lot of the context, like the walking through the office, the water cooler chats, the reading the room, all of that, those contextual things that are going on that we do effortlessly. And you can do it also with skill, but we tend to do it anyway, pick up a lot of the mood that's going around the office and what's happening in the workplace. We also, fewer visual cues, like we don't see the body language. I mean, even I'm sitting here, I'm locked into this seat. I can't really go and walk around. So your access to me is somewhat limited. There's also these micro gestures that we would tend to see, and we miss them because they're just fleeting. And again, a bit of subconscious, when you're talking to someone, you just spot something. It could be just a movement of the eye, something very, very small, tiny gestures that give us a sense of where the person, are they with us or not. Even the voice spectrum is somewhat altered. Like, I mean, there's no perfect audio, like everything is digitized. So the voice spectrum is changed subtly as well. And don't forget, a lot of things go on in the voice spectrum, like where our voice is, our tone. And there's a general physicality that we miss. You know, like even watching someone walk into a room, you know, you get, you know, that's you can learn something from that. Or how someone leaves a room, or if you've had a meeting with someone, just watching how they exit can tell you something. You know, if they just switch off their screen, that doesn't happen. You know, switch on, switch off. Also, interactions tend to be more episodic. In other words, it's a switch on, switch off. So we get an episode from this individual, and then we're on to something else, and then we, like, you know, we touch base with them again at a later stage. And remember, these are the gaps. Lots of stuff happens in between. There are also serial conversations, in terms of conversations over, you know, in a face-to-face conversation, there's much more interruption going on. You know, in a group. When you get into a virtual setting, conversations are more serial in nature, in terms of each person has to take a turn. But also, there is, if you get into email, you know, and messaging, which it becomes more synchronous, as I mentioned here, you also have more, you know, asynchronous communication. So we send a message, part of our conversation, we have to wait for the piece to come back again. And that changes the communication substantially as well, and also opens up more gaps for us to fill in. So coming back to our model, remember we looked at our Mesquite model of emotional intelligence. Remember the way we looked at the four key abilities. So just look at this. We have reduced opportunity to perceive emotions because we have less access to this emotional data. So really much less emotional data is available to us. So it's a reduced opportunity. So what do? We actively decide that we need to spend more time in the understanding emotions, the thinking about emotions, and there's increased opportunity here. This is the key then, I mean, in terms of overcoming this emotional data deficit. So the virtual world, as we said, going to be there, we're going to be living with it. How do we overcome the deficit, the reduced amount of emotional data that either we are providing or that we're gaining? How do we compensate for that reduction in the amount of information that's available to us? You know, we can't physically be there. What are we going to do about it? How can we help others to fill in the gaps better? So understanding that everybody on our team will be filling in some gaps, because that's what we do. How can we help them to better fill in the gaps? In other words, fill in some of the gaps for them, so that they have to fill in less. And how do we overall shape our interactions in order to achieve our desired outcomes? So I'm now going to finish up this chapter. So this is up to the end of chapter 3. Again, if you want to maybe pause and take a short break. But we're going to move to chapter 4. So welcome to chapter 4, changing how we think about emotions, and just a little look at what the implications may be for coaching. I'm not going to tell you how to be a coach. I think it would be self-evident for you as to the role that this plays. So I want to start with a quote, just with a little bit of context here. It's from Martha Nussbaum, from the book Upheavals of Thought. And this is, I think, fundamental to the way we think about emotions and reasoning. So she says, emotions are not just the fuel that powers the psychological mechanism of a reasoning creature. They are parts, highly complex and messy parts of this creature's reasoning self. So I love the quote because it acknowledges that emotions are, you know, complex and messy, but they are a key part of ourselves as reasoning creatures. So even though we may see ourselves as being very rational, or even as some might say rationalizing, emotions are the fuel that powers that mechanism. So we really need emotional data to help us to be at our best. So what I want to look at is, how do we, remember saying we have less opportunity to experience emotions, we have greater opportunity to think about them. I want to highlight to you 4 key areas that I think we can improve our emotionally intelligent thinking if we are to be effective in a virtual world. So we have less opportunity to use the experiential emotional intelligence. So some people are really good at the experiential part, really good at empathy, really good at tapping into their own emotions, really good at, at understanding and really feeling what other people are feeling. But the emphasis here, because we don't have that access, is to look at how we can think about emotions. Four areas. I'm going to cover each of these in turn. The first is emotional forecasting. In other words, thinking ahead about emotional responses in advance. Secondly, showing up with skill. And this is about how we provide emotional data to others and how we actually do that and show up. Also, not just the showing up piece, but actually, what are some of the things we can do in general in terms of providing emotional data to others? Again, acknowledging that there's a deficit. And I just want in passing to also just a tip on the emotional proofreading. So let's look at the first one, which is emotional forecasting. So this is what's really some people would call strategic or forward forecasting, forward thinking emotional intelligence in action. So what is it? So the key here, and this is something that struck me again and again over the last year, is never assume that the other person is having the same experience that we are having. And now this is valid at any stage. But in a virtual setting, and certainly during the pandemic, this came across in a lot of coaching conversations where people assume that, their experience of being in lockdown was the very same as the people that they were dealing with. And a number of leaders fell foul of this, where, say a leader is there and have one very clear case where a leader, is literally, working kind of 24/7. They say, look, I have nothing else to be doing. I'm locked in at home. I might as well be communicating and engaging with my team. But of course, the team, like some of them were trying to homeschool, some of them had illness, not maybe themselves, but close relatives. Some of them were caring for elderly parents. Lots of stuff going on. So the experience that people were having, depending on the circumstances, were very, very different. So it's a really good thing to think about in a virtual team, outside of COVID at all, just in any virtual setting. Even that one person who is working from home, don't assume that they're having the same experience of work that you're having. So I want to look at the strategic empathy, that forecasting. So firstly, we need to think about the other person's context. So really taking a bit of time in advance. So, you just even think the person may be in a different time zone. And again, I do a lot of work globally where we say there can be major time zone differences. So for example, you may be the leader who is just starting your day and full of energy, and yet the person you're about to have a call with is at the end of the day and is completely and are rushing to finish to try and get to do something else. So the different time zone, think about the context. What is it like for the other person? Again, they're not having the same experience that I'm having. They may also be doing something like homeschooling. What other things are going on for them? So thinking in advance about the other person's context before you engage with them, good practice. Also thinking in advance about what the other person's emotional response may be. So this is emotional forecasting, thinking about, okay, this is where, from what I know of this person, here's what this meeting is going to be about. Here's how I think their emotional response is likely to be. Forecasting in advance, really important. And then also in the meeting, when I go in, what am I going to watch out for? So in terms of, because if I know that I'm going to be on the alert for certain emotional indications, that will help me to be at my best and to make sure we get the best outcome from our meetings and our interactions and communications. So in this, I'm not expecting you to be a perfect forecaster. And this is the advice I give. Think in terms of emotional ranges and mixes. Like this is the Pluchik flower of emotions, which is just a way of sort of diagrammatically showing the range of emotions we can feel. Intensity increases as you go from the edges into the center, by the way, if you're not familiar with it. But just even thinking about, here's the meeting, what potentially is this person's response going to be? So like, will it be interest, for example, or could it be surprise? Is it going to be apprehension? So what might be the mix of emotions? And then I'm more tuned into sort of adapting my message for the person, and also ensuring that I am tuned into looking for the emotions from them and actively looking for emotional data from the other person. So just in a practical exercise, So just think about this, you know, and again, you can pause if you wish to do it as a thought on this. So you're going to have a virtual meeting with a direct report about the recent lack of follow through on some critical items. So they joined the team within the last 6 months, seem to be settling in very well, but some issues have come up. They've impacted on the team, had some complaints from internal clients, and you're going to have a virtual meeting with this person. So do you just launch in unprepared, or again, from an emotional intelligence in a virtual world perspective, what are the things which will serve you well here? So firstly, thinking about what's some of the context that will help me prepare for the meeting. So even the context, I mean, if the person is joining the last 6 months, like even think about how is their onboarding? You know, have they had access? Have they had the proper training? You know, what's their situation? Where are they? Where are they working from? Do I know much about them? So what context information might help me prepare for the meeting, getting a sense of this person's world and what their experience might be? What do I think their emotional reaction from what I know of them will be in this virtual meeting? Is it going to be, is it going to be shocked? Are they going to, be disappointed? What's it likely to be? What kind of things are going to be the reaction of them? Will maybe be fear. They've only been with the 6 months, so they're going to be afraid that, oh, this is the start of the end for me. You know, I'm going to be let go. Or is it that, they're likely to see it as, oh, I've made a mistake. I didn't realize that there's going to be some kind of surprise for them. What's the range going to be? How do you want them to feel? So if you think about it, if you want to share the emotional information with them, how would you like them to feel? So let's say typically you might want them to feel that possibility here, acknowledging that things aren't the way they might be, but acknowledging that firstly they trust you, you've given them some honest feedback, you're looking after their development, so they might feel quite trusted at the end of it, and maybe even a bit optimistic that they can turn this around. So what do you want to make them feel, and how will you shift that emotion in the meeting itself? Thinking about yourself, what emotional state will serve you best if you go into this meeting? How do you want to be? And what considerations would you have around things like timing and advance notice? So what would that be? Showing up is a second piece. It's so important to be able to show up being yourself with skill. And there's some key questions. So if you think about the physical workplace, we show up all the time anyway. In the virtual workplace, we have a bit more thinking to do. First, because we have to ask ourselves, like, why am I showing up? Because you choose to show up. You choose to make contact with your virtual teammates. It's a conscious decision. So why am I doing this? What is the reason behind my showing up? When am I showing up? So, when should I do this? I'm thinking about things again, like time zones or timing around other things that are going on. That's a good question to ask yourself. And then thirdly, how am I showing up? So how am I, what is it? When I show up on the day, what is it I want the others to feel? When they look at me, what is it that I want to leave them with? So these are questions that you should be asking even in a physical workplace, but there's much more conscious now because we're in a virtual world. So in particular, if you take something like a crisis, this is just a little piece from a book on ethics, but it's just about why being there is so important in leadership in a crisis. So, I mean, the presence of a leader, say, in a crisis, it really feeds how other people think about you. Do you actually care about them? Have you shown up, even if it's virtually, when a crisis is there? And there are times, when it's really crucial for leaders to be in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And it isn't just about, again, what you're actually doing, actually just being there, and showing up. And if it has to be virtual, it has to be virtual if you can't physically do it. But don't be, saying to yourself, oh, there's nothing I can do here. I'm 100 miles away or 1,000 kilometers or whatever it is. There's nothing I can do. It wouldn't make any difference. The difference is in the actual showing up. I actually had a coaching session with a client recently, and it was a minor crisis, but there was something going on. But actually, when they really gave thought to this, they said, you know what, I actually physically have to go there. I'll have to deal with social distance, but this is too big. I really need to show up in person because I need to deliver this message one-to-one to a number of key people. And that was the showing up. And they actively decided not to do it virtually. It was too critical to do this. You may not have that, opportunity. So this is about, I suppose, this planned emotional self-management. Again, thinking ahead what you're going to do. So thinking in advance how I need to be in order to be at my best. So if I know I'm going to be showing up to my team, you know, I would just say it's the launch of a new project and I really want them fired up. How am I going to be fired up for this? How, you know, they're going to look at me on the screen. Will they see the enthusiasm that I will be able to give them? This is emotional data to them. They see how I feel, not just how I'm thinking, but how I'm feeling and what I'm going to do. So thinking, feeling, and doing again. Again, asking myself, how can I alter my emotions? So if I'm not actually feeling that way, how can I possibly shift my emotions? Is there something I can do to motivate myself? Yeah, and maybe I need to go for a swift or a quick walk or a cycle or run beforehand to make sure I'm fired up for this. What emotional signs should I be attuned to in myself? So in terms of what should I be looking out for? Bring back a little bit of self-awareness. It isn't that it's all now about emotional thinking. We still experience emotions. What should I be looking for in myself when I'm showing up in this situation? And then how can I regulate? So what am I going to do to keep my emotions there? You know, and it could be as literally as I'm currently doing here. I have my feet planted firmly on the ground. I'm very conscious of the pressure on the ground. I can ground myself and feel that there. So things like this. And really importantly, taking advantage of the virtual world. You can really, because it's a virtual world, you can switch on the computer, log in, be there, and then switch off at the end. You have huge opportunity. First is you can really prepare more beforehand. Like you could be doing handstands in your office before the meeting and no one knows. You can't do it in a physical workplace. So you could actually do preparation that you can't do. Really take advantage of doing that. You can use props. So if there's something, for example, that's particularly motivational for you, it could be a medal or it could be an award or it could be just a picture of your family. You can have that on your desk. Like you're looking at this particular recording here. You can see what's around me. I could have anything here as props helping me on the day. And also you can switch off afterwards. You don't have to stay in the zone for so long. You know, when the meeting is over and you've shown up, you can actually switch off. That's really important. The next thing I want to look at then is increasing emotional data, giving and gaining insights. So this is maybe self-obvious, but it's not sufficient to say what you think about something. You know, if you really want to engage people, you need to share how it makes you feel, but skillfully do that, you know, sharing how you feel about things. And this means increasing your vocabulary. You're not there in person to person. You have to put more effort into providing emotional contact and deciding to make it a norm. So when you go into a meeting, you're going to share emotions and share emotional language with others. Questions you ask yourself, how do I feel about this? So firstly, coming back to that, you know, understanding your own emotions. How do I feel about it? What is this telling me? So why am I feeling this way? And then how do I skillfully share this? Key questions for you. Again, we need to think differently about emotional intelligence. These are much more relevant in a virtual setting. We also need to proactively seek more emotional contact. So when making decisions, asking people how they feel about the topic, you know, genuinely just asking people, so how do you feel about that? How does that make you feel? Getting emotional data there. Increase the use of emotional language as a normal part of meetings. That this should become the norm. We should be able to say these things here, and you modeling that for your team. Okay, if, as an example, you're going to have a virtual meeting with your team to announce a restructuring. Okay, there's no reduction in number of staff, but there could be some change of responsibilities. This is a big deal. You could almost say it's a crisis. Questions you might ask yourself. I just give you an example here, but how do you personally feel about it? You know, tapping into what your own emotional response is. How much of this then do you want to share? So you might feel somewhat apprehensive, but also quite excited. So how much of the excitement will you share? How much of the apprehension will you share? And still be your genuine, authentic self. What emotional state would serve you? So I mean, how, you know, if you're going to do this and you can plan the timing, when would you be at your best to do it? Thinking as well, how will the team react? Okay, that you might have to think about even at an individual level, and think about a range. What will you do to surface the emotional response? How will you help the team to tap in? What will you say to surface their response? And maybe you might break this even to smaller one-to-one discussion to really do that. How do you want the team to feel after the meeting? And what would you do to facilitate that? And the final thing I said that we look at is the emotional proofreading. Very quickly, it's literally when you're drafting emails, because we rely on them a lot. is just checking in beforehand as to like, okay, how am I feeling before I start writing this email? Never writing an email when you're angry. If you're doing it a skilled way, it's fine, but if it's your anger that's writing the email, probably not helpful. Checking for tone. So in other words, rereading the email and saying, what is the tone? Forgetting about what the actual, just the logic of it. What is the tone that's coming across? What is the emotional content? If I was to read this and put yourself in, step out and look back in at objectively, what is the tone? And then trying to match the tone to the emotional response you want. So, you're trying to give reassurance, for example, is that coming across? So the other person reading this as best you can, there's a bit of emotional forecasting again. What is the emotional response going to be? So the coaching opportunity for us is, I think, enormous. Firstly, we can increase our clients' awareness of the role that's played by emotional intelligence. We can show them that in a virtual setting, how important emotional intelligence is. We can use assessments to raise their own self-awareness and also tailor our coaching intervention with them. We can use a framework, whether it's the Mesquite or EQI2 or whatever it happens to be, to help them in their own building of relationships, influence decision-making, managing conflict. And also because if we're using a virtual coaching arrangement, if we ourselves are doing in virtual setting with our clients, we can accelerate the development using role play and feedback in the moment with them. We ourselves can actually do some modeling of providing and gaining emotional content, and also helping them to role play some of this with us as well, because we're already in a virtual world with them. Modeling that EI thinking with them and working through some of their own experience and examples. So a bit of a conclusion, just a further reflection, I suppose. In summary, the organizational world is becoming increasingly virtual, accelerated by the pandemic. The role that emotions play are just as important as ever, but they're not exactly the same as in the physical world. We need to think about emotions differently. So in order to be successful, we need to be more proactive. Emotions are data, mostly data about people, and we have an emotional data deficit that we need to address. We have a key role in helping our clients to develop emotionally intelligent thinking. So top suggestions: provide more content, emotional content, seek more emotional content from others, make emotional forecasting a regular part of how you prepare for meetings. Manage your own emotions by matching your own mood to the task you're about to go into, and reality check the gaps that you're filling in. So anytime thinking, feeling, doing, think about the reality checking of those. Find a reflection for yourself. How could this help you as a coach or a mentor? Be more of an emotionally intelligent thinker. How much thought do you give yourself to your own emotional state before coaching sessions? And what emotions do you share with your clients? And how do you do that? And what situations would benefit from emotional forecasting? Let's leave you with a final quote from Tom Harford from his book, How to Make the World Add Up. Our emotions can and often do shape our beliefs more than logic. I think that's well worth thinking about, particularly in a virtual world. So thank you so much for being with me today. I'd love you to connect with me on LinkedIn and to share your thoughts. And I hope to see you again at some point in the physical world in the future at a future conference. Thank you.